Wuthering Waves is pure cinema. No, literally. This video is not meant to be empty glaze, but a deep dive into how Wuthering Waves utilizes cinematography in order to enhance the story experience. You see, I realized something that a lot of modern gacha games have not, and that is that they can use this thing called a camera in order to enhance the storytelling of the game, or to be more exact, a camera perspective, because, well, it's a game, they don't have a real camera. If you are like me, you probably play multiple gacha games, and of course, Hoyoverse games. If that's the case, allow me to introduce you to Eneba. Eneba is an online marketplace where you can top up in all your favorite Hoyoverse games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero. The process is very simple. All you have to do is make an account, access the game you want to top up in, select your server and in-game UID, and you're done! If things are still complicated, do not worry. Eneba has a step-by-step guide tailor-made for each game that lets you understand extremely easy how to top up. Also, for those of you worried that you might get in trouble or that you might be at any kind of risk, you can put your mind at ease. Eneba offers official distribution for their top-up services, so your account is safe. The platform has many reviews and a long-standing history in selling games, with many offers on multiple platforms, so you don't have to worry. Eneba also has a loyalty program with many rewards for frequent Eneba users. So, don't miss out. Eneba is super fast, safe, and I've personally used it to top up in all the games I play. So, before you give in to the 50-50 guts, check out Eneba using the link in my description. It supports the channel and helps you get closer to C6ing your favorite character. Again, huge thanks to Eneba for sponsoring this video. Okay, saying that other games do not do this is disingenuous, because most 3D gacha games utilize a camera, but Kuro Games understands that a good story is more than dialogue. You see, back in the day, due to technical limitations, games would tell most of their stories through text, rarely voice acted, supported by a very simple visual aid to offer a sense of immersion for the players. But as time went by and technology evolved, game got to a point where they can elevate the storytelling to the same level as full-blown movies. In fact, they can do even more since they are not limited by, well, reality. Sure, movies aren't either, technically. They can use many techniques as props, makeup, CGI, and many more to escape the shackles of reality. But those things come with great effort and cost. Video games, much like animations, for example, have a much easier time to escape the confinements of reality and traditional storytelling because, well, they are not real. And this is something that Kuro Games understood very well. They realized that games are a full-blown audio-visual experience that aren't inferior to any other forms of art that use the same medium, while many other gacha games still drop a ton of dialogue on you rather than using all the tools available to them to enhance the story experience together with the dialogue. I'm looking at you, HSR. And look, you already know by this point, I love HSR, but the way they tell their stories is atrocious. Now, let's take a moment to talk about the layers that come with delivering a story. I would like to divide the story experience into three individual parts. First, we have the lore. The lore represents the information about the world that explains why things are the way they are. It is not the main plot, it's the foundation beneath it. Why does this work like this? What history shaped it? The lore includes things like world building, politics, culture, technology, geography, metaphysical/magical rules, and events that predates the plot. The lore is the foundation upon which the story and the characters are built upon. Then we have the actual story or the narrative. The narrative is the sequence of events that happen, basically the plot itself. Think of questions like what happens, in what order, who does what, and why. The narrative includes the protagonist's goals, the conflict and the action, the climax and the resolution of said conflicts, different character arcs, and many more. And lastly, we have the storytelling. The storytelling is basically the method and style used to convey the narrative and the lore to the player. You can have an extremely interesting and vast lore, or a narrative that is very intriguing and complex, but if the way you choose to deliver them to the player isn't up to par, both the lore and the narrative can feel like a slog to get through, and people will not be able to appreciate all the effort put behind them. The storytelling includes things like the narrative structure, the visual symbolism, the dialogue and the exposition, pacing, the environment, foreshadowing, flashback, and the reveal of major narrative plot points during the story. It's less of what's happening and more so how it's happening, or how will the player experience the story that we want to tell. And for the most part in today's video I want to focus on the storytelling, because this is the aspect of the story that I see games put the least effort into. Let's take Hoyoverse games for example. There is no denying that Hoyoverse games have an incredible vast lore, interesting and complex narratives and characters, but for the most part the lore and the narrative are delivered poorly. This is why when it comes to Hoyo games, you usually have two types of people. First are the people who are not bothered by the subpar storytelling and have the ability and the patience to see and appreciate the lore and narrative past it. Those are the hardcore lore enjoyers or story enjoyers. People who can clearly see the effort Hoyo puts into developing the lore and narrative and develop an appreciation for it. On the other hand, you have a very big portion of people who, due to Hoyo's bare-bones storytelling, get bored and off-put by the story and cannot appreciate the elements that are underneath. This is why I really like Wuthering Waves. Kuro Games understood that it's not enough to have good lore and narratives, but the way to deliver said lore and narrative is just as important. And look, as an avid player of both Hoyo and Kuro Games, I will be honest. I personally think that Hoyo does a much better job when it comes to the lore and the world building of their games, and their narratives are usually a little bit more complex. But I feel like the reason why many people prefer Wuthering Waves' story over Genshin or HSR is simply because Kuro tells their stories better. And keep in mind, just because Wuwa tells a simpler narrative, it doesn't mean that it's worse. Simplicity does not equal quality. I think both Kuro and Hoyo have strengths and weaknesses when it comes to their narratives. For example, due to the sheer size of their lore and complex narratives, Hoyo struggles sometimes to stay consistent. And also because their stories rely on a deeper understanding of the lore, many people cannot grasp what's happening in a single playthrough. Kuro, on the other hand, feels like it's not that good at integrating the character stories into the main story quest. Best example of this is Yuno's quest in 2.6. Not that it was bad, but it really didn't feel like a main story quest. At the same time, I feel like having Grover be this flawless superhero on a mission to collect wives, with a few exceptions like the Prolova quest, hurts the narrative more than it helps it. I understand why Kuro does this. At the end of the day, this is a gacha game that tries to sell characters to parasocial freaks in their parents' basement that have to live in this fantasy world that they are some sort of hero loved by everyone in order to escape the sad reality that is their own life. But I digress. Look, at the end of the day, this is a gacha game. It will prioritize profit over quality, and if raising the profits means sacrificing parts of the narrative, they will most likely do it. Any company would probably do it. At the end of the day, all gacha games do this. An example regarding this that I like to use is the 2.8 story quest that, in my personal opinion, would have been a lot better if they took the time to properly set up the narrative of Honami City, which was the first story quest in the patch, rather than have this entire second half be just us going on a date with Chisa and our harem from the Black Shores. The idea is that each game has its strengths and weaknesses, but I want to put the emphasis on how important the storytelling is for the overall reception of the narrative and even understanding the lore. Bad storytelling can completely ruin an exceptional narrative, while good storytelling can elevate a simple narrative to something so much more. I feel like it's also why when I play the story quest for a game like HSR, I often have to do it in multiple sessions, sometimes over multiple days, because due to the sheer amount of information presented to me in a, let's say, visual novel kinda like way, where I'm mostly reading the text and the characters are standing in front of the camera with very little movement, I have to put extra effort to pay attention and to understand every bit of text, and that can get exhausting. Again, it's not that the narrative is necessarily bad, but it's very hard for people to get through it. On the other hand, I can play the entire quest of Wuthering Waves in one sitting and have a great time. Not only is the narrative simpler, which helps a lot, but the way they deliver it is also a lot better. For example, in moments with a lot of exposition, you will notice that Kuro often does this surreal transition where we see characters change location and interact with the elements that are told to us through the dialogue. This helps us visualize and understand things a lot easier. This is a game at the end of the day. You can do anything in it, so use your goddamn resources and imagination to show us things and help us understand the narrative and lore in a more visually compelling manner. Also, the way the camera is always moving and we get dynamic shots of both the characters and the environment helps keep our attention for a longer period of time. If you keep the camera in a single spot or you repeat the same 2 or 3 shots over and over, your mind will naturally wander off after a point. But if you constantly give your brain new information through the visual filter of the camera, it makes the experience a lot easier to sit through. This is what it's called directing. It's your job as a director to make sure that you use the camera or any other tool available to you as a director in the game to make sure that the player can follow the information and that they can concentrate and keep their attention on the plot. Not to mention that Wuthering Waves has this very good system with the glossary to deliver important lore when it matters. A lot of times when playing other games, I have to stop and go to outside sources like their wiki pages to reaccustom myself with some pieces of lore or terms and dialogue that was revealed to make sure that I understand what the characters are talking about. But Wuthering Waves has this tool where important lore terms are highlighted in the dialogue box, and by clicking on them a new window will open explaining the said term. Yes, this system is also part of the storytelling, and I wish that more games would adopt it. When it comes to gacha games, for the longest time, due to budget and time constraints, the story was delivered in a visual novel format, where you have 2 PNGs of the characters with different expressions and poses talk to each other. And because of this, the storytelling was more similar to a visual novel. In fact, it was literally a visual novel. But with the dawn of Big Daddy Genshin and the new generation of mainstream gacha games that want to compete with actual AAA games on the market, the medium evolved to the format that we have today, where gacha games have the budget, technology and manpower to deliver full-blown cinematic experiences and utilize the audiovisual medium of games to their full potential. But for some reason, some writers, especially the older ones that were in the industry before this boom, and in Chinese gacha games for the most part, still write the stories like it's a visual novel, which in my opinion buries the full potential that these stories can truly reach. And Wuwa was honestly in the same position back in the beginning of the game in 1.0. But after the initial backlash and all the feedback that the players gave them, I'm happy to see that Kuro realized that there is more to the storytelling and that investing into the experience that the players have while playing the story of the game can improve not only the reception that people have for the set story, but also the experience that people have with the overall game. The issue when you try to capture a mainstream audience is that simplicity is king. Do not overcomplicate things. Visual novels are a niche for a reason. They usually are very long, verbose, and people who are into them are there because they love reading long stories with a lot of dialogue and minimal visual and audio inputs. Is a visual novel, the illustrations and voice acting are there to aid the dialogue and the text. But in a game of this caliber, the visuals and audio cues are there to tell the story together with the dialogue, each using the strengths of their medium to convey a message. When you want to appeal to a mainstream audience, which is mostly normie people, it's best to keep the narrative simple and make the story as comfortable as possible to sit through. This is not a niche audience that knows the ins and outs of the medium and are there because they like that type of storytelling specifically. These are mostly regular people that have lives, commitments, and don't have the time to invest an incredible amount of time and effort into a story. So make things simple for them. If you unnecessarily complicate things, then sure, your hardcore audience will appreciate you, but the biggest bulk of the mainstream audience will just be off-put. Kuro Games understood this, and that is why they were able to deliver some of the most visually impressive and immersive stories when it comes to gacha games, while also maintaining a steady player base and attracting new players. As time went by, they only improved, so I cannot wait to see what the future will bring us. I am very excited for 3.0 and Lahai Roi to raise the bar even higher.